Over the past 40 years, thousands of combat pilots have been saved from certain death by their ejection seats. Come with us and see what it takes to eject. From the earliest days of combat aircraft, a system was needed to escape a damaged aircraft. Toward the end of World War I, the first parachutes became available. Until this time, there had been no means to escape a burning aircraft. By the 1920s and 1930s, parachutes had become standard equipment on all combat aircraft. The pilot simply leaped from the aircraft and pulled the ripcord to release the parachute. The dogfights of World War II proved the necessity for life-saving parachutes. But in spite of the many successful cases of parachute escape, problems began to develop as aircraft speeds increased.
In the Second World War, aircraft speeds started to get higher and higher, and a means was required to assist the pilot out of the aircraft in the event of an emergency. Up to World War II, it was quite reasonable to just jettison the aircraft canopy and jump over the side with a parachute. But as the speed gets higher, the wind blast holds you back in the cockpit, prevents you from bailing out. And also, it delays you. It takes you more time to get out of the aeroplane. If the aeroplane's diving close to the ground, and that's when the biggest emergencies are, then the time taken to get out of the aeroplane can be absolutely vital.
Even when the pilot managed to escape the cockpit, the high speed of the fighter plane posed another problem. It was very difficult for the pilot to avoid striking the tail. The escape problem continued to worsen as aircraft speeds continued to increase. In the autumn of 1944, Allied fighters began encountering these strange new German fighters with sleek, swept wings. They were the world's first jet and rocket fighters. The high speeds of the new jet aircraft made the pilot escape situation even worse. The Germans had begun to work on a solution, the ejection seat. The idea behind the ejection seat was to hurl the pilot out of the aircraft with enough speed that he would clear the tail. The seat we see here was being developed for the Messerschmitt 264 America bomber, a type which was not completed before the war's end. By the end of the war, the first primitive ejection seats were installed in the early jet fighters, such as the German Heinkel 162. Work on ejection seats had also begun in Britain and the United States in the final years of the war. One of the central problems in early ejection seat design was human engineering. Could a pilot withstand the tremendous gravitational shock of an ejection? Could he withstand the enormous wind forces? In England, the firm of Martin Baker pioneered the early seats.
From an engineering point of view, the ejection seat was developed quite quickly, and we were able to soon come up with the velocities and accelerations that we needed to clear an aircraft fin in a high-speed dive. The problem was that nobody knew what those accelerations would do to a man. Nobody had ever ejected, and all the pundits, the doctors, everybody else got in on the act, but nobody knew what would happen. And so they looked for a volunteer who would actually ride this seat. And the man who came forward was a chap called Benny Lynch. He was one of the company's fitters. He was working on the bench, and in fact he had helped to make the rig that he was now going to test. It's rather like making your own gallows, you know. This chap stepped forward to test this seat.
Behind the ejection seat was a tubular ejection gun. This system consisted of a set of telescoping tubes which contained a small explosive charge. When activated, the charge fired the seat out of the aircraft. They were rough on the spine, as Benny Lynch would painfully discover.
And what they found was happening was that the acceleration was being applied too quickly. The rate of rise, or the rate at which the acceleration was applied, was too quick. And what was happening was that the vertebrae in the spine were banging together like boxcars in a train, all banging together and causing damage to the spinal column.
Sir James Martin undertook a careful engineering study of the human spine. To avoid the hard shock of ejection, he devised a new system. Several small charges were fired instead of one large charge.
So instead of getting one great big kick, we went to 3 progressive accelerations, which allowed the man's spine to compress without jarring the vertebrae together, causing spinal injury. Having done that, about this time Benny Lynch had recovered, and who better to test it than the man who'd had the problem in the first place. And so Benny stepped forward very courageously once again and rode the seat up the rig, and eventually they achieved the right accelerations that were needed to clear the fin of an aeroplane.
In the summer of 1946, the ejection seat program transitioned from ground tests to the real thing.
Watch carefully as in the special rear cockpit, Lynch gets ready to fire himself out for the second time. As the seat leaves the plane, the stabilizing drogue preventing the seat turning over in the air opens and then pulls out the seat parachute. Normally, only the drogue is used. The parachute has been fitted solely to prevent damage to the seat during these tests. Now, in his own time, Lynch can free himself from the seat. Watch just below the white canopy, and you will see Lynch's own parachute open as he falls clear.
The success of the early Martin Baker ejection seats was being paralleled elsewhere. In August 1946, Sergeant Larry Lambert ejected from a U.S. Air Force P-61 fighter. The following year, the first successful test took place in the Soviet Union. By the late 1940s, all of the new jet fighter aircraft were being equipped with ejection seats. The new invention had come just in the nick of time. In 1950, war broke out in Korea. The Korean War was the first conflict where jet aircraft predominated, and it was the first time that ejection seats were widely used in combat. American pilots flying the F-86 Sabre tangled with MiG-15 fighters flown by Chinese and Russian pilots.
Tiger lead, Tiger 2 here. I got a couple of bogeys out there. One coming around at 2 level. Roger, boy, I got him.
The Korean War experience highlighted a number of problems in ejection seat design. The early seats were only designed to get the pilot out of the aircraft. Once ejected, the pilot had to free himself from the seat, leap forward, and open his own parachute. But on ejection, many pilots were dazed or injured and couldn't get free of the seat. An automatic seat was needed.
The absolute fundamental of ejection seat design is the shortest time between pulling the ejection handle and being on an open parachute. And everything else is really irrelevant. The most important thing is getting that parachute open. It's only when the man is safely hanging on the parachute that you can be confident that he's going to survive in an emergency situation. And so many engineering hours were spent in developing automatic mechanisms on the ejection seat which would not only eject the man from the aeroplane, not only deploy the drogues, but would then automatically separate him from the seat and deploy his parachute for him.
Because this new ejection system helped the pilot escape from the seat, it made ejection at low altitude safer. This new generation of ejection seat was in service by the mid-1950s. Increasing aircraft speed continued to be of concern to ejection seat designers. By the late 1950s, new combat aircraft were capable of breaking the speed of sound. The U.S. Air Force was worried whether the pilot could survive ejection in a conventional seat at these speeds. So work was begun on an encapsulated ejection seat for the new supersonic B-58 Hustler bomber. The B-58's Stanley capsule seat was built around a conventional ejection seat, but in addition, the system included a special ballistic shell to protect the pilot. Prior to ejection, the crewman would close up the capsule. This capsule offered the aircrew a high level of protection, even at supersonic speeds, but it had its shortcomings as well.
But it was a very complicated system, and it was heavy. Now, normally only 1 out of every 10 ejection seats manufactured is used in anger. And that means if you have a heavy system in an aeroplane, 9 of the aeroplanes are going to be penalized by toting a lot of weight around that they don't need to carry. And that's going to affect performance. It's going to affect the weight, the bomb load or whatever that they can carry. It was also found that in reality, ejections don't normally occur at very high speeds. If something goes wrong with an aeroplane, the first thing it does is slow down, especially if it breaks, wing comes off, something like this. The aeroplane slows down very rapidly. And so the number of ejections that have occurred above 600 knots have been very few. It's a fraction of 1%. And therefore there's no need to develop that type of technology. So that type of seat went away.
In the 1960s, the U.S. Air Force went in another direction in the design of its new escape system for the supersonic F-111 strike fighter. The whole forward cockpit formed a self-enclosed capsule that would be ejected free from the aircraft in an emergency.
The F-111 crew module forms a portion of the forward fuselage and is comprised of the pressurized cabin and the stabilization glove.
The F-111 capsule was the most complex escape system ever designed and is still in service today. As this test footage shows, it suffered from the same heavy weight penalties as the B-58 capsule. The F-111 system was the last encapsulated ejection system ever fielded. Instead, Air Forces began to concentrate on improving more conventional ejection seats. Ejection is always a risky business, and in the 1960s it was especially risky at low altitudes. Likewise, ejections at slow speeds, such as immediately after takeoff, were dangerous, since the parachute had little or no time to deploy. What was needed was an ejection system that would save the pilot no matter how low or how slow. These were called zero-zero ejection seats, meaning that they functioned at 0 altitude and 0 speed. The first live ejection with a 0-0 seat was tested by Martin Baker in 1961.
Watched by members of the world press and observers from the United States, Dottie Hay pulled the faith blind, which resulted in an ejection height of over 300 feet.
The critical innovation of the 0-0 seat was the addition of a rocket under the seat. Once the pilot was ejected clear of the aircraft, a rocket engine was ignited, boosting the pilot high enough for the parachute to function properly. This type of seat was especially welcomed by Navy carrier pilots who faced the special risk of engine failure accidents during the catapult launch. To convince Navy pilots of the advantage of the new seats, Martin Baker built a special test rig that was launched off a carrier. Not surprisingly, Martin Baker seats have become a staple ingredient of U.S. Navy aircraft, including the latest, such as the F-18 Hornet. 00 seats, manufactured by such firms as Martin Baker in Britain and McDonnell Douglas and Stencil in the United States, have become the basic ingredient in nearly all escape systems on modern fighter planes. Let's take a look at how the ejection seat works. On entering the aircraft, the pilot buckles in and attaches a series of restraints to the flight suit. On ejection, these harnesses will restrain the pilot's limbs and pull the pilot back to the proper vertical orientation. To operate the ejection system, most contemporary ejection seats use a ring between the pilot's legs or handles in the armrest. Older seats from the 1950s used an over-the-shoulder face blind, but this took precious time and was difficult to do if the aircraft was out of control. On pulling the ejection handle, a series of actions rapidly occur. The harnesses at the pilot's shoulders pull him back into the seat. This minimizes the risk of damage to the pilot's spine. The arms and legs are also pulled into the seat to prevent them from hitting parts of the cockpit when the seat is ejected. There are 3 ways to get the ejection seat through the cockpit canopy. On some aircraft, the canopy is blown off by an explosive charge. On others, explosive cord contained in the canopy itself shatters the plastic. On other seat designs, the ejection seat is powerful enough to smash through the thick plexiglass. After having pulled the ring, it will take only 2 seconds for the pilot to be ejected clear of the aircraft. Once free of the cockpit, the rocket engine will fire. After this occurs, the critical parachute phase begins. First, a small drogue chute will be released. The drogue chute prevents the seat from tumbling. Once the speed is sufficiently reduced, the seat automatically releases the pilot's harnesses and separates the pilot from the seat. With the seat clear, the main parachute begins to deploy. The modern ejection system is more than just a parachute. In the event of landing in the water, it contains an emergency pack with flotation equipment and survival supplies. Contemporary Russian aircraft are fitted with a modern K-36 ejection seat, which is basically similar to those used in European and American fighters. During the Paris Air Show in 1989, a MiG-29 lost engine power after striking a bird. The aircraft was less than 500 feet from the ground, losing power and heading for the crowd. The pilot managed to steer the nose down and eject literally at the last second. Let's see that again in slow motion. The pilot's parachute barely managed to open fully, yet he walked away from the accident. A real credit to modern ejection seat design. Few ejections are more harrowing than an upside-down ejection, as Marine Captain John Walsh discovered during a Desert Storm combat mission. His Harrier was hit by an Iraqi anti-aircraft missile and went out of control.
It's a very violent experience. I was hit during my 39th mission on the second day of the ground war, and I made it south across friendly lines before I got out, but I was trying to divert into a field we'd recently overrun, and I ended up ejecting at 900 feet upside down. But this is the stencil seat in this aircraft. I think it's the finest in the world. A system in the aircraft knows its attitude, directs the seat so it won't shoot you down into the ground. I went out the side, and we get a shoot immediately. There's actually a ballistic spreader. It's like an explosive that spreads the canopy open immediately, so you get a shoot right away, and you're hanging in the chute as quick as you can blink your eye. When I went out, we lift our head for proper spinal cord positioning, but I remember seeing a flash, then I remember seeing a flame between my feet as the rocket motor was throwing me out. It felt like 100 hands were tearing at my flight suit, trying, the wind blast. Then I felt the chute open, and the opening shock was quite severe. It really knocks you for a loop. I saw a lot of stars. But next thing I know, I was hanging in the chute about a second and a half later, and thinking to myself, well, I'm along for the ride. I hope the seat works, and it did. And I hit the ground. Luckily, the sand was soft because I hit pretty hard. But I got up and started running south, and felt pretty good about that seat. Wanted to go back and get it, but had to leave it out there.
Current ejection seats have proven to be remarkably effective. But the increasing performance of modern fighter planes, like the Saab Griffin we see here, is encouraging the development of even more sophisticated ejection seats. Ejection seats are entering the computer age. Microprocessors are being added to the seats to sense the best angle to steer the seat once it clears the stricken aircraft. These new seats undergo rigorous testing on special high-speed rocket-propelled sleds.
The latest ejector seats are actually trying to bang the pilot out, and they're actually, regardless of which angle he comes out at. I mean, the aircraft probably isn't straight and level, but it's to actually twist and push him up high enough to stand a chance of survival.
Modern ejection seats have added a critical measure of safety to the dangerous business of flying today's warplanes. The success of today's seats give the pilot essential reassurance when the need arises to eject.
Firepower, the world's largest and most complete videocassette series on contemporary military technology. There are many more titles in this series which you can order now. If you want the latest in today's advanced weapons systems in the air, on land, and at sea, look no further. For program titles and information on how to order, call us at 1-800-377-7773 and get Firepower.